my name is Leonard, and I'm here today. We're going to be doing, we're going to be making beaded medicine pouches, and we may as well just get right into it. As you can see, we're going to be beading right on. This is leather that we're using, and we're beading right on the leather. So. We also have, I'll show you everything that you're going to be using. You're going to be using this piece. This is for the outside of your medicine pouch. And this is the inside of the medicine pouch. And it's going to go together like this. So this will be the outside. This is where you're going to be beading, where you can see the outline of a medicine wheel. So we're going to use that outline to bead on. Okay, and we're also going to be using a short piece of lacing and also a long piece of lacing. We'll use that after we're done all our beadwork. The other thing that we're going to be using is, these are called Glover's needles. And Glover's needles, you got to be careful with them because there's a sharp tip on the end. And so if you poke yourself, you could really hurt yourself. So be careful with them. But the reason we use them is because it's going to be much easier to pass to pass the needle through the leather, because we're going to be beading right on the leather. And they're also thin enough. These are ultra fine Glover's needles. So they're fine enough to pass through the holes in the beads. So if anybody has any experience with sewing or anything like that, you'll notice that the Glover's needles that we're going to be using, or beading needles, are much more fine than regular sewing needles. And the reason is because you need to be able to go through the holes in the beads. So the other thing we're going to be using is beading thread. And there's a big difference between beading thread and sewing thread that you would use on a sewing machine, for example. Beading thread is much more fine. And again, it's so that you're able to put it through the hole of the beading needle. So you want to cut off about, maybe not that long, maybe about an arm's length of thread. And the way I start, I'm gonna pass this through some beeswax, and this just helps it to avoid tangling. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tie a knot at the end of your thread. So the way I do that is I'm going to make a loop. And I'm going to put the tail through that loop several times. Maybe like 5 or 6 times. And then I'm going to pull it. And then it's just an easier way to make your knot. Because you want to make sure that your knot is thick enough that it's not going to pass through the material that you're using, or the leather in this case. So that's a big enough knot there. So I'm just going to trim the end. And then I'm going to thread my needle. So I find a good way, if you plan on doing more beadwork after this, a good way to thread your needle, because often when you use, not so much with these needles, but with more beading needles, they usually have a very narrow hole for the eye of the needle, so it's really difficult to get it through. So what I would suggest is hold it really close in between your fingers, like this, and that will kind of help guide it through the eye of your needle. So we're going to use a thread that's just a single layer. We're not going to double it like this. It's just going to be a single layer of thread. So now what you need to do is when you're doing your beading, you need to make sure that you hold on to the end of your needle so that it doesn't come off. Because it's frustrating, especially when you're just learning how to bead, if you're always having to rethread your needle. So you want to make sure that you're holding on to the end of your needle with the thread in it. So, and another thing I would like to mention is it's very important to use a thimble. I really like these rubber thimbles because they just fit on your finger, and it's not hard. I find them a lot easier to use than the usual metal thimbles. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with yellow. So we're going to work on each of our sections individually. So we're going to start with yellow first, and then we'll move on to red, black, and white. So we're going to start with yellow, and what we want to do is we want to start in one of the corners, so to speak. So in order to find out where you need to put it in, because you need to put it in the back side, but because when you put a needle through leather, the hole doesn't come out. If you take the thread out, the hole will stay. So what I want to do to make sure that I'm putting it in the right spot, I put it in the front first. And I'm just going to see it from the back side. So now I can see where I want to put my needle. I can find the spot. So that's the spot where it needs to go, one of the corners. And as you can see, all the while I'm holding on to the end of my needle so that it doesn't come off the thread. Now, I'm going to start with the yellow. And what you want to do when you're beading, you don't want to do this. There's one more thing I wanted to mention. You want to have some kind of fabric, as you can see what I'm using. I'm using just a scrap piece of velvet, and the reason I'm using it is because it's a nice fabric to use to avoid your beads from running all over the place. So you could use a paper plate, but it's not the best. So I really recommend a fabric like this, or you could even use, if you don't have any fabric, you could use like a sweatshirt or something like that to put your beads on. Just something that you can work on. So what you're going to do now is you're going to pick up 2 beads. So throughout this whole project, you're just going to be picking up 2 beads at a time. Okay? So now, once I've picked up the 2 beads, I'm going to put them down to the base. And what we're going to do is we're going to go left. So we're going to start going around the outside of your design. Okay? So now what I'm going to do is I place the beads where I want to tack them down. And I'm going to put my needle there. And as you can see, a thimble is really important right now. So I'm going to push that through. And again, you're holding on to the end of your needle. Pull that through. Then what you're going to do is go to the back side and go to the spot where you just put, where your thread just went up. So right here, and you can see where it needs to go because your knot is right there. So there's no guesswork. You just put it back up. And then you're going to put your needle back through the last 2 beads you just put on. Okay? So we're going to do that again. Pick up 2 beads. Place them where you want them to go. You can see there what I'm doing. And then push that through with your thimble and pull. So the idea is for when you're putting on your beads, you want your thread to be coming out from the beads that you just put on, not coming up from the bottom. So again, I'm going to turn this to the back. So now I can see where I need to put my needle, because it's where the thread went up through the leather last time, if that makes sense. It's sort of hard to put it into words. It's a lot easier to show you. So now I've got it up through the leather, and now I'm going to put it back through the last two beads that I just put on. Okay? And I'm going to go until I reach the next, the end of this line. But we're still going to finish this section before we move on. So if you notice the way I'm picking up the beads from my material, I think I might have mentioned this before, but you don't want to go like this, because you don't want to catch your needle on the material that your beads are sitting on. So the key is to hold your needle like this. You want to have it sideways. And you want to push your needle through the beads. Okay? So again, we put our beads on. We place them where we want them to go with the needle. Push your needle through, pull, and then you want to find in the back where your thread just went up before. So push that through. So you're only going back through the last two. And you're pulling it through. Okay, so now what we're going to do is if you can see on here, there's probably only room for one more bead in there, in that little space. The rule of thumb when you're beading is less is more. So you don't want to try to fit too many beads into a little spot, because chances are it's not going to fit and it'll look crowded, so you don't want that. So we'll just get one more bead to fit into that little spot. And we're going to tack that down. Pull it through. And then we're going to go back, since we've only put on one, but we're going to go back enough for two spaces, so that your needle comes up back to two beads. Then we're going to pull that up, and we're going to go back through those last two beads. Now what you're going to do, so we've come to the end of the outside of this section. So now what you're going to do is put your needle down to the bottom. And you're going to bring it back up in a slightly different spot, just maybe a millimeter away, just so that you're not going back up the same hole. Oh, that didn't work. I'll have to try that again. Okay, so it's a slightly different spot, but close enough that you can get through the beads. So now what you're going to do is you're going to put your needle through all the way through all of this line of beads. And I suggest just going through maybe a few at a time, because sometimes if you try to go through more than that, your needle will get stuck in your in the thread. So now it just doing that just helps it to just to tighten it a little bit and make it a nicer line. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back down to the bottom. So we're going to pull that through. And now we're going to continue following this line, but we're going to make a new row. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go down a little bit on this line. I'm just going to pierce a hole here so that I know on the back side where you need to put your needle. I'm going to move that over just a tad. Okay. Now, we're going to follow all the same steps as we did before. Still picking up 2 at a time. Place it where you want it to go. And then you're going to go back to that same spot where you put your beads on first. And put your needle back through the last 2 beads you put on. When I'm coming up from the bottom to go back through the last 2 beads, I'll try to get it in between these 2 rows, but in this case I didn't, but I try to aim for that. I'm just trying to sort of push the beads against this row here, if that makes sense. So if you're wondering why, I'm not sure if I explained this, but the reason why I just use a single strand, and the reason is because if you end up making a mistake or your thread gets tangled or something like that happens, if you need to take your needle out for any reason, you're going to be able to do that if you're just using a single strand. If you double it, you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have to take your thread out and rethread a needle. So it's just easier to do it this way. Because we all make mistakes, even me, and I've been beading for over 20 years, so the mistakes never stop happening. So we've got enough space for 2 more beads on this row. So you want it to stop right where the line is, if you can see that. So we're going to place the beads again where we want them to go. Pull it through the back. Go back up and go through the last 2. And you might notice that while I'm doing this, I'm sort of pulling on the thread a little bit. It's just to tighten it, because we want to have nice tight beadwork. Not too tight. You don't want to pull it till it looks tight, but you want to have it. You want to have all your beadwork straight. So again, I'm going to do the same thing as I did with the last row, and I'm bringing it back up, bringing the needle back up. Oh, I screwed that up again. See what I mean? I still make mistakes. Bring that back up. And put it back through this whole row. Now we're going to go back down. And we're going to come back up again a little bit further down. So we're just going to keep doing row after row here. I'm going to mark it so that I know where to put my needle. Okay. There's other techniques of beadwork as well. There's a double needle technique, but I think for beginners, I think this is the best technique to use. And this class is meant for people who have never done beadwork before, so we want to start from the beginning. I notice that my thread is starting to fray a little bit. So this is the nice thing about using a single strand. So I'm going to use my beeswax, and I'm just going to pass that through so to help stop it from fraying. So now I can continue. So I've got the 2 beads on there, so I'm just going to continue. Place that where it needs to go. And then put it back up. Okay, so I just have one more row to go for the yellow, and I'll be done. So for the last row, you don't want to go right into the corner because it's going to end up being too crowded. So you just want to put on, I guess it would be your second last row, so you just want to put on 2 more beads for this row. And place it in there. So if your thread is getting too short to go on any further, you're going to have to change it, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. Let me just get this last row on here. Okay, so I'm going to go back down again. And what you're going to do is you're going to go to the back side when you want to change, even if it's in the middle of doing a section. If you need to change your thread for any reason, you can do it at any time. So what you do is you're going to take, and you don't want to go much shorter than this before changing your thread, because it'll be really difficult to make your knot in the back. So what you want to do is just take your needle, and you're going to take a little piece of leather in this case, or material if that's what you happen to be beading. But you're just going to push it through, and you're going to put your needle through the little loop that you made here and pull. Okay? So we're going to cut that. And by the way, I don't know if I talked about these, but these scissors are really handy for beading, because you can get into really tiny spots, which is nice to have. So I'm going to bead another piece of thread. Again, it's about arm's length. We've got a little friend in here. Okay, so I'm going to wax the thread, and I'm going to knot one end of it again. And we're basically doing the same as what we did in the beginning. So we're just we're making a loop, and we're putting our tail through the loop at least 5 or 6 times, maybe even more. And you want to have you don't want to go too close to the end, because it'll be really difficult to make a knot. Okay. So now we're going to start on the red section. So we're going to go to this area here. So we're working clockwise. So what I like to do, I like to have my thread, as I mentioned earlier, coming out of the beads rather than coming up from the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up through the last couple of yellow beads on the outer row. So you're just coming up through the last 2 yellow. And I'm going to put it through here. So then I'm going to pick up 2 red. Tack it in place. And we're going to be doing all the same steps as we did before. Just put it back up. Oh, I think I've got a little, oh, here we go. And put it back through the last 2 beads. And again, we're just following the outside line. Oh, I've got a knot in my thread. So I think what I'm going to do is just cut that, because I don't want to have to pull that knot through every time. So I'm just going to make it a little bit shorter, which means I'm going to have to change my thread again sooner, but that's okay. Okay, so we're coming to the end of this line here. And again, we're going to just do the same things as we did before. Let's follow the same steps. So now when I come to the end of putting my needle through all the way through that first red line, I'm going to go back down. Oh, I need my thimble. I'm going to go back down, and again I'm going to start from the last two beads in the second row. So I'm going to go back here, and as you can see, I'm putting my needle back through the last two of the yellow. And now I'm putting two more of the red. So the next color we're going to do is black, and again we're going to just follow the exact same techniques we've been using up to now. So now we're going to go back through the last two red, and we're going to continue going clockwise. Okay, so we're coming to the end of our project, and as you can see, we're done the beadwork now. So now what we have to do is assemble it, which is really easy. So what you do is your pieces are all pre-cut, so they've got the holes in them. So what you're going to do is you're going to hold it upside down with the smaller piece, I guess in this case it's the back. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your long piece of leather and you're going to put it through the holes, one of the holes that's at the bottom. Well, it looks like the top, but it's actually like this. So it's going to be assembled like that. So you want to put your long piece of lacing at the bottom. So it's just easier to hold it up like this. So I'm going to pull that through until this is, until your lacing is equal on both sides, or close enough. So what you want to do now is you're just going to go in and out through the holes. Just like that. Really easy. And sometimes it's hard to get through the holes, so I'm going to use my little tool here to help me put the leather through. Sometimes you don't have to, but it's just easier to use it. You can use these, or you can use a pair of tweezers if you have that. That'll work too. So we're just going down one side, and then we're going to use this and we're going to go down the other side. Okay, I finished that side. Now I'm going to go down this side. Okay, so now we're coming to the end here. And what we're going to do next is we're going to just tie it at the top. So make sure that it's straight here. I'm going to push it to the top as much as I can. Now, we're going to put this on the inside, so the inside two holes. So this is the outer flap. You want to put it from the inside of the two holes here. So we're going to have the two pieces coming up equally on both sides. So now we're going to put this through these two holes on the outer flap. Okay. And this just makes it so that, well, actually, I'll show you this first. So we're going to put our beads on. And I find that this leather is a little bit thick for the holes of those beads, so I'm going to just trim it a little bit so it'll be easier to put the beads on. And you want a pair of good scissors to do this. Well, that's probably good enough on that side. So I'm going to go according to the colors of the medicine wheel. So that's yellow, red, black, and white. So we'll go yellow first. And you're going to use your pony beads that are provided in your kit. And black. And same for the other side. You could put these beads in any order if you want. That's just how I want to do it. There you go. Now we're going to knot the end of these pieces here so that your beads don't come off. There you go. So now you can open your pouch and put things in it, but you don't have to worry about things falling out. That's sort of the idea behind this. And that's it. You're done.